everyone talking about the pardons from President Trump, and actually President Biden had pardons too. They both had a lot of pardons on the inauguration day. But I'm talking to Jeremy here, and he was given a presidential pardon by Donald Trump. Tell me a little bit about that. How did you find out that this was maybe going down?
Yeah, Dave. Well, thanks for having me on. Obviously, there was speculation that Trump was going to pardon a large portion. Nobody knew exactly how many of the January 6th defendants. That was something that he had campaigned on and promised to do at various points, multiple times throughout the campaign cycle last year. So I actually was connected with a number of other January 6th defendants through Telegram and hearing a lot of different things from folks. But by and large, the consensus was that Trump was likely to pardon the majority, if not all, and commute the sentences of the rest. And obviously, last night, I think it was maybe around 8 p.m. or 8:30 p.m. Trump signed the pardons in the Oval Office. So that was when I first found out exactly what was going to happen.
Okay, and I'm looking here. This happened when it was years ago now, but this, according to, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this is what the government says. Court documents say you were carrying a Trump flag attached to a wooden pole, and you attacked police officers.
Yeah, that's the claim. I disputed that claim and went to trial and fought that claim. They had accused me of using the flagpole as a dangerous or deadly weapon, which, with the help of my attorney William Shipley, we were successful in defeating that accusation, that claim that I had used the flagpole as a dangerous and deadly weapon in assaulting an officer. Um, it's a little bit nuanced, but the charge that they had hit me with was 111B, I believe, under 18 USC 111B. I think that's the actual statute that I was charged under. There are two prongs to that. Essentially, the dangerous or deadly weapon is one prong of that statute. Causing bodily injury is the second prong of that statute. And to be found guilty of that statute, you only have to be found guilty of one of those two prongs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'm
So,
looking. So the way they have it, I see here, found you were found guilty of what is it, right? Civil disorder,
yes,
assaulting, resisting, or impeding, using a dangerous weapon, entering and remaining in a restricted building. That's basically like trespassing, right? I mean, in a way.
right, right.
Okay. And then four, disorderly and disruptive conduct in a restricted building or grounds. Okay, so those were all. That's what you're talking about. You were found guilty on the whole bundle of those.
Right. And so
Oh, there were more.
what
Engaging in physical
right.
violence, disorderly conduct. Was it actually was it a jury, or how'd that go?
Yeah, so I opted to not go for a jury trial because if you look at the jury pool, which is 95% Democrat in D.C., there was no way you're going to get a fair trial by jury in Washington D.C. So I opted to go the route of a bench trial. But I want to go back real quick to the charges. So
Yeah,
initially, and I'm going to try to keep this as short as I can and as
no, that's
succinct
fine.
as I can, but
That's fine.
initially, I was charged with 6 felonies and 3 misdemeanors. And uh, originally, I was charged with that 111B count, which is the assault with a dangerous or deadly weapon or an assault resulting in bodily injury. In the original indictment, which came, I believe, in the summer of 2023, I was only accused of using the flagpole as a dangerous or deadly weapon, not of having caused bodily injury. So fast forward to June of 2024, just last year, the Supreme Court threw out the obstruction of Congress charge, or the 1512 charge that I think over 300 defendants had been charged with. And after that Supreme Court decision, the I think that was the end of June. In August of 2024, the DOJ under Biden brought a superseding indictment, adding in an allegation that I had caused bodily injury to an officer they had accused me of assaulting. So that was a new charge. So now, after that superseding indictment, I had been charged with both prongs of that 111B count. So we beat the dangerous or deadly weapon prong of that 111B count, which resulted in 3 of the other felonies being reduced to just misdemeanors.
That's what. Okay, I'm seeing one of the
So
an
yes,
article here. So found guilty of misdemeanor, but not guilty of the felony enhancements, as they say. I guess.
yeah, and I think that's probably the article found in the Midland Daily News, which very disingenuous news organization, as I'm sure you probably know. Most of the establishment news I find to be well, as Trump puts it, fake. They like to embellish things. However, so the interesting thing is the 2 prongs. The most serious of those 2 prongs was the dangerous or deadly weapon. I was successful with the help of my attorneys in beating that allegation. The second allegation was causing bodily injury. And now I'm not an attorney, but obviously I've learned a lot over the last couple of years dealing with all of this. And my understanding is that bodily injury is defined by the law very broadly. There's a number of things that are specified under the statute that defines, excuse me, what bodily injury is. And one of them essentially says causing somebody pain, any amount of pain for any duration of time is defined as bodily injury.
Okay.
So the reason I say that is it's important for my particular case, because what ended up happening was the officer that I was accused of assaulting, which I would still maintain to this day, I did not assault
Okay.
that officer. Um, he had done a series of 5 interviews with the FBI.
Okay.
One, within a couple of months of the events of that day, January 6th, 2021, and then the rest were following that. In the first 3 interviews that officer did, he never once referenced me or the alleged interaction that occurred between him and I, which was about a 5-second interaction with that officer. Never once claimed that I hurt him or caused him pain or anything like that. But he did specifically mention to the FBI that were the agents that were interviewing him. He mentioned other incidents throughout that day, but never once mentioned the incident with me as being
Oh.
something that had caused him injury. And then he did a 4th interview in November of 2023, where the FBI specifically asked him about the interaction with me and asked him the question, was that interaction with this individual here in this video clip that they were showing him, was this painful? And that's important because the statute defines bodily injury as causing pain to an individual. So they asked him that question explicitly, and his response was no, it was not painful. So fast forward.
What exactly was it? I mean, I think when you see that in the paper or in the media, they think you literally took a flagpole and slammed him in the head. What happened?
Right. So let me finish this really
Go ahead.
quickly, and I will get to that. So
Yeah.
the 4th interview, he specifically stated, no, this interaction was not painful. Then
Okay.
in August of 2024, last year, so less than a year later, the officer totally flipped his statement.
Hmm.
So in his 5th and final interview with an FBI agent, the officer, for the first time ever in 3.5 years, this was 3.5 years after the events of that day, claimed that I had caused him pain. Now, it's interesting, if you look at the timing of all of that, it was, a matter of weeks, just over a month after the Supreme Court threw out one of the other felony charges that the DOJ had brought against me. And it also happened to be only 35 days, if memory serves. I think it was 35 days exactly before my trial that they did this final interview with this officer. Now, my trial date ended up being moved, but the important reason that I bring that up is if the DOJ wants to bring a superseding indictment against a defendant, they have to do so at least 30 days prior to the scheduled trial date. So they did this final interview with this officer. He changes his story. 2 days after that, they brought a superseding indictment, which basically meant they just very narrowly were outside of that 30-day window where if they wanted to bring a superseding indictment, they had to do so, 30 days beforehand. So they've just narrowly met that.
Okay.
So
Wh-
the question is, was that intentional?
Well, and hold on. When was the trial again? When did that happen? Was that last year?
Yes. So the trial, I eventually ended up going to trial in December of last year, December
Oh,
10th.
just recently. Okay.
Very recently, yep. So I have not even been to sentencing at this point. I never made it to a sentencing hearing. I got a guilty verdict at trial. Um, but ultimately, we that was one of the crux of our defense was essentially that, look, this officer changed his story. The timing of him changing his story is sketchy. We weren't going to go so far as to say that the officer perjured himself, but don't know that he could actually say 3.5 years later that he remembered the specific interaction that occurred because it was so short. That was a very chaotic day. And so we wondered if perhaps the DOJ had uh, basically maybe coached him to say, to change his story in such a way
Yeah.
to be able to bring another prong of that 111B charge against me. So
So
ultimately, the judge, at the end of the day, found me guilty of causing bodily injury, but not of using a dangerous or deadly weapon.
that's still a felony?
And that is a felony. Yep.
Okay. So, but you hadn't been sentenced yet.
No, I have not been sentenced.
Okay. So you could still you could vote when in November. You could have you weren't convicted of anything. You can, right? I mean, you weren't. Well, no. Well, how does that work? Like you could vote in the past election, right? You're not a convicted
Correct.
felon. Okay.
Right. So I did vote in the last election.
Okay. So what did, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but when you see that in the media and the DOJ releases their news releases, I'm thinking you grabbed a pole or something and you beat the officer. Is that what happened?
No. So essentially, what happened is the video footage shows, and it's hard to describe without looking at the video footage, but essentially, I'm on one side of, I guess you could say it's a porch on the outside of the Capitol building on the east side, outside of the Columbus doors, as I think that's what they're called,
Yeah.
the Columbus doors. I'm on the right side of those doors, far away from police officers at that time. All of the police officers present before this interaction takes place are on the opposite side of the door in a line, and everybody is essentially at that point just standing around. I mean, there's no violence happening that I recall, no scuffles with police. But what ends up happening, I did not know this at the time. I've since learned this having watched a lot of footage, but somebody opened those doors that was already inside the Capitol from the inside. And those officers must have been alerted to that or something. And they threw a flashbang into the crowd right near me. And what ended up happening was that line of officers basically very aggressively moved into the crowd, shoving people out of the way. It looked like a scuffle had broken out essentially right in front of me. I did
Okay.
not know that there was an officer in front of me. I previously worked for the Attorney General of the state of Michigan when he ran for governor. I'm a big
Yeah.
supporter of law enforcement. I would absolutely never intentionally assault an officer of the law under any circumstances.
So
But
it
what
was
I
chaos.
saw,
It was
it, it,
chaotic,
it was a
basically.
very chaotic moment. And what I saw was somebody basically scuffling with somebody right in front of me, maybe 2 or 3 feet in front of me. I could not identify at that moment that that was an officer. And the video footage shows me essentially maybe a 35-degree tap, like into the direction of that scuffle. My intention was, hey, stop fighting. That's not what we're here for. We're here to protest peacefully. Stop fighting. And it appeared in the video footage. It's kind of difficult to say. The video footage appeared to show maybe I made contact with the officer's helmet one time. The federal government alleged that it was 3 strikes to the head, and it was rather laughable, Dave, the way the prosecution in the courtroom uh, you know, uh, essentially tried to demonstrate what they claimed I had done, and they were using like a two-handed swing and like showing that I was like clubbing this officer. and trying to make their case to the judge that
Did they
I
release that? Had that video been released publicly at all, or no?
I think that there are multiple public source videos that are out there of that
I'm just,
interaction, and
just wondering. Okay,
I
did they
don't
play it?
know.
Did they allow you to play it in court and go over it?
Yes, we did go over it very carefully. There was some question as to whether or not my flagpole even made contact with the officer's helmet. Ultimately, the judge said, I think it did. Um,
Wow.
there was some
Okay.
question as to whether or not my flagpole actually came into contact with the Columbus doors themselves or the helmet. The video footage was really not very clear.
Okay, so that's the big moment that it was all about that moment there. You
Yeah.
didn't go on you didn't go on afterwards to attack people inside the building or anything like that.
No, in fact, I shook hands with police officers that day and thanked them for their service. I had no intention of assaulting or harming or destroying property, none of that whatsoever. So I entered the Capitol building after that.
I see a picture of at
And
Midland Daily
yep.
News. They have the picture of you in the single file line.
Oh, they loved that picture. But I did end up going inside the Capitol building. And again, um, I was not even thinking about the fact that it might not be legal to have gone inside the building that
Okay, so
day.
that's you. I'm bringing it up. That's you right there. You're within.
Yep,
You're walking in, and that's after this thing incident happened outside. That right?
correct.
Okay, so you're
So
walking in. So
I
I mean, did you know you were trespassing then, or no?
I was not aware of the fact that I was trespassing, and I'll tell you why. Um, I previously worked in the Michigan Senate as legislative staff. That is a Capitol building, albeit in Lansing and not in D.C. In the Michigan Capitol building, at least at the time that I was working there, was open to the public during normal business hours. And the Michigan Capitol building has no security. You can walk in and you can literally walk into representatives and senators' offices while you're in the Capitol building and talk to people. It didn't even occur to me that that was something that I should not have done. Uh,
Did
I
you
will tell you
see
that
like the video let me add the videos you see on social. I mean, did you see the front of I think the front where windows were broken and all that? Could you even see any of that?
that was on the opposite side of the Capitol
Okay.
building from me.
Okay.
Excuse me. And
Yep.
and so uh, interestingly enough, there's actual video footage of me walking into Statuary Hall, and I'm on camera, and you can hear the audio. And I tell people around me, do not deface the statues or the building. So my intention initially, when I first decided I got to go inside the building, was not even to protest the election results that day, but I could see other people and hear other people destroying property inside the building. And I didn't want that to happen. So I decided, hey, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to tell people, don't destroy property. We're not BLM. We're not Antifa.
Yeah.
That's not how we operate. Going inside, peacefully protesting, didn't think that was a big deal. So that's what happened. And I was inside the building, I think, for maybe 20 minutes, somewhere around that. And the first time that I was actually asked to leave the premises by an officer, I did
Mhm.
so. Now
Oh,
I did question the officer. I said, "Is this not a public building? Aren't we allowed to be here?" And he told me, "No, you're not allowed to be here. But yes, it is a public building."
and
And
then you left.
I think, yeah, I think if I remember correctly, I just said, "Well, that's an oxymoron," and turned around and walked out the door. So that was that.
Okay. Okay. That's that. And then months later, you get a knock on the door. Or year
Well,
later, year more than
years, almost 2 years later. So what ended up happening was I was at my office in December of 2022, and I was working in insurance at the time. And I lived maybe a quarter mile away from my office, but I had two federal officers show up to my office, and they did not tell me what it was about, but they told me that they wanted to interview me regarding an ongoing investigation. And to anyone who's listening, the correct response anytime any law enforcement officer wants to interview you about any investigation, even if they tell you it's about your grandma or it doesn't matter what it is, the correct response is, gentlemen, I appreciate you have a job to do. I'm not comfortable answering any questions without an attorney present. And that's exactly what I said to the FBI agents that came in to ask me questions.
Yeah, that's your
They handed
right.
me they handed me a business card and said, please have an attorney contact us. So I actually called one of the attorneys that I insured. I insured his law firm, and he called the agents that day and did not get any response back that day. He left them a message. 2 days later, I was fired from my job, even though I had been charged with nothing at that point. At the end of the week, my attorney that I had contacted still had not heard anything back from the FBI. So he told me, I'm going to send them an email just so that there's a paper trail showing that we tried to cooperate. We tried to comply with their request.
Yeah.
So he did that. And then we heard nothing.
Yeah.
6 months later, while I was out of town for work, the FBI, with approximately a dozen agents, raided my house and took my wife and my 2 and 3-year-old sons out of the house in their pajamas at 6 a.m. at
Oh,
rifle point, shoved them in a van, and then proceeded to, I guess, search would be the word that they would probably use, my house. But in reality, what they did is they trashed my house, stepped
yeah.
on my kids' toys, took all of our clothes out of the closets and just threw them all over. I even had an American flag that I had hanging in my closet that they took and tossed aside, very disrespectfully. I mean, I was always raised, you respect the flag, you don't let it touch the ground, and you dispose of flags properly once they're worn out. But very disrespectful to the flag. Raided my house. Ultimately, they took nothing, and I was asked to turn myself in the following day to the nearest FBI field office, which at the time for me happened to be in Orlando, in Florida.
Gotcha. So I'll fast forward to yesterday. What's your? Are you relieved now? I mean your name's out there. Your name's on the internet. You're out there as being a felon, but now you are pardoned. How are you feeling? What's going through your head?
Well, I got to tell you, Dave, after the election, I felt some relief. I knew that Trump had promised that there would be some form of relief coming for January 6th defendants. Obviously, the DOJ prosecuted these people in a manner that was far different from other protests that had previously occurred at the Capitol building. I would say we were targeted because we were Donald Trump supporters. But after Trump won that election, I was looking forward to seeing what Trump would do. He promised us that he was going to govern with the principle of promises made, promises kept.
Yeah.
And looking forward, I thought it was possible after that election that I would be pardoned, and thought that might be actually kind of a cool thing. Not that many people could say they've received a presidential pardon, and then Joe Biden pardoned 8,000 people. So I guess it's not that special anymore.
Do, do you regret the whole thing? And I interviewed someone the other day from Flint who received a pardon as well, and he said he doesn't. He would do the same thing, go again. Do you regret anything, or that this even happened? Would you not have went to Washington D.C.?
Well, let's be clear, Dave. It's not been an easy few years. It's been a very challenging few years, and a lot of uncertainty and a lot of anxiety and stress. Um, but at the end of the day, what this boils down to is I'm a patriot. I love my country. I've done my best in the years that I've been given on Earth here to serve my country. I've worked in the Michigan Senate. I've worked in campaigns, worked for different politicians, ran for office myself locally. I even tried to join the Army National Guard when I was in college. Was turned away, unfortunately, due to some medical issues. I love my country, and I believe that the Constitution is quite clear about how federal elections are supposed to be held. Article 1, Section 4 gives state legislatures the power and the authority to determine how they're going to conduct federal elections in their state. And in 2020, critical swing states, including our state of Michigan, had either governors or secretaries of state bypass their state legislatures using COVID as political cover, and they altered their state's election laws and held illegal, unconstitutional elections. that was the reason that I believe the 2020, and it still is the reason I believe the 2020 election was not legitimate. And so I viewed it as my constitutional duty, my duty as a citizen of the republic, to stand up for what I believe to be right. So I would say I still feel that way. I would still do that again. If I had everything, if I had it to do over again, I would still do everything again. Obviously, I didn't intend, nor would I ever intentionally assault an officer. I want to make that perfectly clear.
Okay.
If I could somehow change that, obviously, I wouldn't intentionally hit an officer. I wouldn't have tried to hit an officer. Uh, Certainly would want to avoid that, and I did throughout almost the entirety of the time that I was there that day.
Gotcha. You let me play something for you because this is what's going around. We know who this guy is. This
Yeah,
was
Chuck
earlier.
U. Schumer is what I think Rush
Yeah,
used to call him.
yeah, listen to this.
It's a golden age for lawlessness and lawbreakers who were pardoned yesterday by President Trump. There is no other way to describe President Trump's pardon of January 6th offenders than un-American.
Okay, so what's your take on people like, or Senator Schumer and others who are saying Trump pardoned convicted felons who hate their country?
Well, first and foremost, I would say a large number of the people that were charged in relation to January 6th were veterans, and they took an oath to the Constitution that they were going to support and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Certainly, I would not describe them as people that hated their country. They believed in what they
No.
were doing. I believed in what I was doing. I believed I was taking a stand for what was right, and I would do that again. I find it ironic that Chuck Schumer would be critical of Trump pardoning felons when we just watched Joe Biden pardon over 8,000 people at the end of his term, including members of his own family, Hunter Biden, who was a convicted felon, and many, many others, including the members of the January 6th Select Committee, or as I
Yeah.
like to call them, the Unselect Committee. And Liz Cheney suborned perjury. See, I don't know if you saw that story. There's evidence that she was communicating with a witness, a key witness, without her attorney, and basically coaching her on what testimony to give.
Yeah, I saw that. How do you, I mean, you're a young guy. How do you move on? Because if, you go for a job, you go somewhere, they're going to Google your name. I mean, and you have the pardon there, but how do you move on? I mean, you're very, I give you credit to go and put your face out there now. Your name, your face is out there. How does your life pan out now that you're going to have to deal with this?
Dave, that remains to be seen, but I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
I love my country, and I believe that there are a lot of people who also love this country, love their country, that are out there that will hire the J6ers. They'll give them opportunities for work, and I'm not worried about that. I think that that will work itself out. And I do want to say one thing, Dave, and that is that I thank God that I did not have to spend a single night in jail or in prison. And there were dozens and hundreds of other defendants who were put through literal hell and sent to solitary confinement for months on end and spent years in jail in horrible conditions. And I never had to do that. But those people, to me, those are the real heroes, the people who went through that crap.
Gotcha. I want to ask, so you do, I mean, there was extreme violence that day. There were people that did commit violence, correct?
I can't say. I didn't see any myself.
Okay.
What I can say is the video footage I've seen seems to indicate to me that the police, particularly on the west side of the Capitol, instigated much, if not all, of the violence. My understanding is that the law requires police officers to give 3 warnings to a crowd to disperse and allow them adequate time to comply with that order before they are allowed to use explosive munitions like flashbangs or tear gas
So I guess
or other.
are you blaming the police for what happened?
I would say that the blame as Nancy Pelosi said and admitted, lies entirely at her feet and also probably at the feet of the mayor of D.C. They had opportunity to provide 10,000 National Guard troops that Trump offered to them, and
That's
they
a good point.
refused to do so.
That's what I want to ask you. In my 25 years of reporting, whenever I'd cover an event where there would be a protectee, like Mike Pence was there, he had Secret Service protection. You could not even get close to a building. How was the security that day? It didn't look like there was much really, because well, you've been in politics. You've probably been to events where there's a high security presence. What was the security presence like? Because obviously, people were able to just kick over a fence and move in. What was it like?
It was almost negligible. It was negligible. I remember walking from the Washington Monument towards the Capitol building and then around to the east side of the Capitol building. And I bet you, if it's hard for me to give an exact number, but I would say if I saw a dozen agents, I think agents, I say agents, police officers, I think maybe there were a dozen police officers that I saw during my entire walk to the east side of the Capitol building.
Yeah.
So very, very little police presence to begin with.
Yeah, and I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying, covering presidential, vice presidential things before, the security is always so heightened. That's why it surprises me that this was allowed to happen. And I I'm not blaming the police I'm just saying, I just wanted to know, because I wasn't there. I always know, covering events, Secret Service, whenever like a VP or a president is somewhere, that area is cordoned off like crazy. And that's what I was just wondering.
Right. Well, and for sure, I can tell you, I've been to events when Trump was president and campaigning in 2020. I mean,
Yeah.
Secret Service everywhere, metal detectors, secure perimeters, the whole nine yards.
Yeah.
None of that was present on January 6th, 2021.
Wow.
And it's also my understanding. Again, I could be wrong on this point, but I think that I'm correct in that the initial breach of the Capitol perimeter, if you want to call it that, happened before the joint session of Congress even began.
Was that
So they
the video you see of the front, that gate going down? That's when it.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. My understanding is that event took place and protesters started filling the west side Capitol lawn before the joint session of Congress began.
Yeah.
So if you already knew that had happened, why would you even convene Congress? Why would you not just delay it and make sure that the building was secure before doing that?
Yeah.
Definitely a lot of security questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, I give you credit, speaking out, because you've been through a lot, and the people are saying, on the other side will say the police, and like there's people who are going to say you are a felon in their eyes, no matter what, that you assaulted a police officer. That's what you're convicted. So you're moving on. Are you going to try to get past this, or how do you? I mean, like you said, you're hoping that people will hear your story, basically, right?
Right. Well, I think that the election of Donald Trump in November of last year already proves that most people understand and realize that this event was overblown, exaggerated, that the media clipped footage to show the worst possible portrayal of that they could of what happened that day. Obviously, you're probably familiar, Dave, with the fact that the January 6th committee literally hired a television producer to put on.
Yeah, that was bad. It was a Hollywood made to.
Correct.
Yeah,
and then those and a lot of those officers, in my opinion, that testified in front of that committee lied. They made things up. They exaggerated. We do know, of course, that the witness that Liz Cheney was texting, going around her attorney to communicate with, that she was telling her what she should and shouldn't say and coaching her. That sort of behavior should be unacceptable. And then the fact that the January 6th committee deleted, this is what I find the most interesting.
I heard that, yeah.
The January 6th committee deleted almost every single bit of evidence they collected, which why that's interesting to me is I was originally charged with an obstruction of Congress charge, the 1512 charge. The Supreme Court specifically ruled in June of last year that to be charged with that, you have to have tampered with or destroyed documents to obstruct a congressional investigation, which is exactly what the members of that committee did when they were asked to turn over their records after the elections in 2022, when the new Congress was coming in and Republicans had control again. They asked that committee to turn over all of their records and they destroyed them. That is obstruction of a congressional investigation.
And they never looked into security, did they? In that hearing, they didn't dig into the failure of security at all, I don't believe.
I can't comment on that. I don't recall specifically.
Yeah, but so anyway, okay. Well, I appreciate you. You know, and why did you decide to even talk to me or other people? Is it really to let people know? Because I think people have in their mind if you were to go to someone, a stranger on the street, and tell them, they would think you literally took a flagpole and started beating a police officer. That's what I would think when I hear that news release. So is that why you want to kind of get the word out your side as to what you say happened?
Absolutely, that's part of it. I think the record needs to be corrected. There was a lot of exaggeration, certainly a lot of overcharging of defendants that took place by a weaponized Department of Justice. I think the narrative needs to be corrected. I believe that Trump has already succeeded in doing that. His election last year proves that, and I think people are gonna see through the lies and the exaggeration of what actually happened that day. Most importantly, I would be remiss if I did not say thank you to President Donald John Trump for pardoning me and every other January 6th defendant. Obviously, I appreciate that, and I'm a big supporter of Donald Trump, and hope that the next 4 years are successful. I'm looking forward to the new golden age, as he described it. So I definitely want to thank him. I want to thank the other January 6th defendants, many of whom went through far worse than I did, for standing up for what they believed to be right. And many of them paid a heavy price for doing so. 6 of them lost their lives.
Yeah. Thank you so much.